Good morning and welcome to the After Show. This is, of course, available on Substack, first of all, in the first instance, but then it's going to be out on YouTube for everybody in a couple of days' time. This is, of course, the After Show where we speak to people who have got a particular interest in one subject or another, or might happen to just be philosophers, might happen to be authors, might happen to be journalists, might happen to be specialists in any particular arena. This morning, I'm delighted to say, we're going to talk to Helen Dale, an author, an Australian literary powerhouse, I think some people might say, who I've known for many years, who I used to talk to on a very regular basis on my old show at Talk. And Helen, I'm not really even sure when we stopped talking to each other, but it sort of happened in some kind of, realignment of the stars at Talk, where they were like, let's change the guests around and let's talk to some new people. So I'm sorry that happened. I'm delighted to have you back, delighted to see you for the first time in a while. Welcome to the new show.
Thank you very much for having me, Mike, and I am delighted to be on your show again, I have to say, because whilst it was some point in 2022, I did a couple of spots on your show on the Ukraine war, and then I left, and it wasn't clear to me, and I don't think it was to you, why I wasn't invited anymore, but I just know that you were told not to have me on anymore, and it may have just been, let's change the guests around.
Yes.
But it may also have been, and this was my suspicion, excuse me, at the time, is because I used the word nonce before the watershed. That's what I thought it might have been. Because I remember you being forced to apologise on air for one of your guests using the word nonce.
Yes.
And I thought it might have been that. But by the same token, lots of other people say worse things and have worse swear words. And I know with Ofcom's rules that nonce is considered one of the weaker swear words. It's not like the F-bomb or the C-bomb.
No.
So that's just a theory, and I could be completely wrong.
Yes. I mean, I guess it's one of those things we'll never know, really. But one of the great things about what we're doing now is that we don't have to worry about any of that, because we now are free to express ourselves in as reasonably responsible a way as possible. We're not so worried about bad words, although I think YouTube does have a few kind of, trigger words that we try and avoid using, because obviously if we use those, that's damaging our own brand, because it means that they'll demonetize the page or they won't let you say certain things. But I don't think it's not politically correct stuff. It's more about words that they think might be offensive, or in any event. But I mean, let's talk about things which are much more offensive than words, and that is actions and things that actually do harm people. And since you and I last spoke, obviously, the huge and terrible story of Bondi Beach and the killings there happened just a few short weeks ago. I mean, it seems quite a long time ago, but it was really less than a month, wasn't it?
Happened on the 14th of December, just before Christmas. And I have to say, it was a shock to me, because Australia has never had proper Islamist terrorism. Right. And as I wrote in the piece that for Law and Liberty, which is the magazine that I work for American think tank, a lot of Australians had quite blithely, and I have to include myself in this, thought that there would never be the sort of terrorism that existed, Islamic terrorism that existed in other developed countries, and indeed in many Muslim countries as well. There was one fellow, and this was back when I was living in Australia in 2015, there was one incident known as the Lint Cafe siege, where there seemed to be an element of Islamism, but there were lots of other things. There was terrible police failure. The two people, one of the people who died was actually killed by police bullet in the ending of that, what they called the siege. Yeah. And the perpetrator, who was also killed, was, as much as he was Muslim, and I'm not making excuses for him here, he'd only been Muslim for a little while. He was one of these people who kept hopping from religion to religion. And he really was absolutely certifiable, a complete and utter nutter. And there's no other way of describing it. So Australians tended to park that incident. And I freely remember, I'd travel to other countries and you would see Australians, and Australians would make jokes about Hezbollahs and diversity bollards and Merkel Lego and that kind of thing, because we didn't have them in Australia. So I always thought, and most Australians thought before Bondi, that the country's immigration system, which is very different from most other countries, and the quality of its civil society and its state capacity would prevent this from happening in Australia. So this was an enormous national shock to the system.
Yes. And I think as well, it was the because so much is now sort of captured on film, captured by people's mobile phones, and you can see and feel the kind of terror now. You don't just hear about it on the news, you don't just see the aftermath, you actually watch it in almost real time, which I think is almost more traumatic than anything, isn't it?
Well, it makes everybody, and this started in a global sense in 2001 with 9/11, and that was, in those days, that was before that kind of streaming internet existed, but it was news services because it was New York, a big city, and they all have offices and cameras and staff there. But what it does is it makes everybody else a witness.
Yeah.
That's the thing. We all become witnesses to it, often in quite similar ways to people who are called as witnesses in a trial. And I can tell you from practitioner experience, that can be a very, very unpleasant experience. Even if you're not being asked difficult questions in cross-examination and you're just being told to provide a narrative by the judge or by counsel to provide what's called a narrative of events.
And I think the nature as well of the attack with, two guys with submachine guns, automatic weapons.
No, they weren't. That's what the complexity is. Australia does not have those kind of firearms in the country, except held by the military and a very, very few police officers. As I pointed out in my piece, also with on For Law and Liberty, what they were just standard hunting rifles.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm no gun expert, so when I say automatic weapons, I guess I by that I mean, a very high-powered piece of machinery which can fire multiple shots. I accept it wasn't a machine gun, but no. For those of us watching,
they were bolt-action hunting rifles. So you have to chamber each round.
Right.
I'm doing the hand movement here because I grew up on a farm, so I know how to shoot one of these weapons.
Right.
So you have to chamber each round. And there is some argument that there was some modification because often you have to do a movement. I'll try and lean over and show you. That's like this.
Right.
To chamber the round.
Okay.
So this is really awful and not very good. And if there's any shooters out there, please don't laugh at me too hard. Yeah. These guns had been modified so you didn't have to do that.
Right.
And you could just do it with that movement. Right. But you still had to chamber each round before you could fire it.
Okay. Well, my point is
standard type, though, that are owned by many, many Australians and very similar to guns I have fired myself in my life as a young person.
But I guess what I'm saying is certainly for those of us on this side of the pond who don't know much about guns, and I think I've shot a gun once in my life on a New York Police Department firing range. It was a pistol. When you see video footage of men standing on a bridge firing what looks like indiscriminate shots at people who are simply minding their own business. I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is that that's the kind of the terrifying aspect of it, that you're witnessing something that you've likely never seen before, and that it's pure horror.
Absolutely, yes. And there was about the positive thing that came out of it is there is an enormous amount of evidence, so that's a positive thing, and the good side of Australia's immigration policy was shown in the behaviour of another Muslim, Ahmed al-Ahmed, who's a Syrian immigrant to Australia, who was the hero who disarmed one of the shooters and saved many lives. So this is the thing. So it's hitting Australians in two ways. It's, oh gosh, we've got this great system. We managed to pick the good Muslims, and then that. This is, it's really, really confronted the country, and it's created enormous difficulties for the Prime Minister. And I can explain a little bit of the background to this, but he behaved, Albanese, a man who I have met, and I have to say historically had a lot of respect for, even if I disagreed with his politics, genuinely popular, did not win his election despite stories over here and elsewhere because of anything that Donald Trump did. It's really quite hard for a foreign leader to have much effect on Australian politics because of the compulsory voting. Albanese won 2 elections in a row, the second more comprehensively than the first, on his own merits. He was liked, he was popular. And he has reacted very badly to the killings. And this has taken 2 forms. The first was he took 3 weeks to order a royal commission. And the traditional way that Australians deal with very difficult questions of national purpose, basically, is by holding a royal commission, which has claws and teeth. It really, really will force you. There's no privilege against self-incrimination. All they do is they guarantee that you won't be prosecuted if you're placed in a position of admitting something that you've done that may be criminal. And they also protect you from defamation proceedings in the civil law. So you're protected, but you can't lie to them. You can't do the American thing, which I will do for some of your listeners and viewers. The American thing of put the hand up and go, I'll take the fifth on that,
right,
and close your mouth. You are forced to open your mouth and tell the story. So this took 3 weeks. Albanese kept refusing to do it. He was abandoned by about half of his own party, the Australian Labor Party, because the Australian Labor Party is enormously divided over this issue, because Labor in Australia has a system of formal factions, and Albanese is from a faction known as the left faction, and they don't really have an equivalent in the UK because we never really had proper Blairism in Australia. But as a backbencher and as an undergraduate, he was heavily involved in the Students for Palestine movement.
right.
And Australia had, just before Bondi, not a long time before, but just before Bondi, had actually recognised the state of Palestine the way France and a couple of other countries did, but not for the same reasons. When you read stories saying, oh, France did that because they didn't want Israel to go and annex the West Bank, that may be true for France. It won't be true for Australia. In Australia, you can only do something like that if it plays well with the local electorate, once again, because of the compulsory voting. Now, the reason in Australia that Albanese and Labor decided to recognise Palestine, and I'm going to have to say this, and it's going to sting a bit, but Australia is a different country. It has different politics and history and heritage, is before Bondi, the pro-Palestine side had largely won the public argument. And they had won it fair and square, with exceptions, which I'll discuss later in response to your questions. With exceptions, their protests were very peaceful, well behaved. They put 100,000 people across the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
That's the image people remember, isn't it?
In piddling rain, in absolutely biblical rain, that image of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And they had been well led. They had cooperated and worked with New South Wales Police, because there's no, apart from the odd partial exception of Victoria, there's no actual right to protest in Australia. Australia draws a very sharp distinction between words and deeds. And so protests, you often have to, particularly to use a landmark like the Sydney Harbour Bridge, you have to go and get a permit, and you have to apply to the police and then to the Supreme Court, State Supreme Court. And so they had largely won the argument, and partly for well-run protests, but also partly because of the Australian trade union movement. Even the right-wing unions, including the one of which I used to be a member, the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association, which is represents another Labor faction known as the Labor Right faction. And the reason the unions were backing a Palestinian state is because what has been called by the Federal Court, Australia's second highest court, in a litigation in the middle of last year, Latuf and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, is the Jewish lobby, or the Israel lobby, has become heavily implicated in cancel culture. Now, I was one of the victims of this. I copped it in 1995 over my first novel. And there would be extraordinary letter writing campaigns to your employer, or to your publisher, attempting to get your book withdrawn, which was done to me, or attempting to get you sacked, which was later done to me when I worked in various legal roles, law firm roles, and then later for a parliamentarian. Now, and this was really unpleasant. They really worked to shut people down. To give you an idea, I had objections.
And was that based on what they perceived to be anti-Semitic writings?
Yes,
or what?
it was. Yes, it was. And the whole rationale of the behaviour of the Israel lobby or the Jewish lobby was the way we win this argument is to shut up our critics, to just silence them. Now, my novel does not mention Palestine at all, and I'm one of those people. I don't pay much attention to foreign affairs. I care about the involvement in my own country. But so it didn't just catch people who were pro-Palestinian. It caught anybody.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly destructive. I remember when I was at the Parliament, letters would be written to parliamentarians, including my parliamentarian boss, trying to get staffers sacked.
Right.
Letters would be written to editors of newspapers, and also just like lobbying, intense lobbying. People would get lobbying passes and round up politicians to sack staffers, make life very difficult for newspapers and broadcasters if a journalist was critical of Israel, to try and get that journalist sacked or at least removed from a very prestigious position of being in the Canberra Press Gallery.
Okay. So let's move it on a little bit, Helen, though, because I wanted to say that given what that background is, which is a fascinating background for you to describe, since the Bondi incident, has that situation changed? I mean, has anyone drawn a line? Has anyone now drawn a line between the sort of, shall we say, encouraging of a belief in a Palestinian state with now, the sort of the backlash against people who might have been sympathetic to that, who have now been killing Australians?
Absolutely. What has happened is, and this explains some of Albanese's bad behaviour because of his historic involvement in the pro-Palestine movement, but also many other people. And there's polls around on this. In a second piece on my Substack, I actually have a screenshot from an Australian poll. And you must remember, polling in Australia is much more precise because everyone has to vote. This matters. Okay, it really matters. So the Australian people, after generally, in a sort of relaxed, very Australian way, being roughly sympathetic to the idea of a Palestinian state, have turned a complete 180, absolutely turned around, and now being in support of a Palestinian state is associated with murderous terrorism.
Yeah.
And the bad behaviour from people on the pro-Palestine side has come from the fact that they don't realise the country has changed. And the country has absolutely changed on this issue. I am reasonably confident if, for example, Albanese is so wounded, I mean, he is currently just being torn to shreds with his legislation in the Parliament. I would have liked to have given you an update, a proper update, and your listeners on the legislation that he has attempted to put through the Australian Parliament to deal with this. But I can't because it's a mess.
Yes.
And the last news story I saw was a parliamentarian, and this is in the lower house where Labor has a majority, saying, we have absolutely filleted that legislation, and with a big grin on his face, saying it's been destroyed.
Yeah. You made an interesting comparison as well. I was reading your piece last night where you said that the trouble for Albanese was similar to Boris Johnson's problem when COVID came along, because he comes across as a sort of jolly, hail fellow, well met, smiley face. We are very confident in our country. We love our country. We can do great things. Rah rah. My name's Boris.
Very much so.
All of that, and they can't deal with tragedy because you can't smile. And you I thought your the turn of phrase was brilliant. It's all very well kissing babies, but you have to be able to go to their funerals as well.
Yes, kissing babies is the easy part. Going to their funerals is the job if you're the Prime Minister. Because what you have to do in Australia, because of the compulsory voting and the high political engagement of the electorate, is you must be able, in a tragedy, to reflect the people back to themselves. And it also means you have to absorb into yourself the tragedy.
Yeah.
And the way that Albanese, he failed in a very specific way, and this was dreadful, and Jewish Australians were very unhappy about this, is he did not go to a single one of the funerals.
Right.
Whereas, and this is important, Albanese is from the left faction of the Australian Labor Party. Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, is also Labor, but he is from the right faction of the Labor Party. He went to all the funerals. He responded entirely appropriately. He did he did the thing to the people of New South Wales that Albanese should have been doing for Australia, which is taking the grief into himself.
Right.
And what that meant was that Albanese finally, when he went to the main memorial service, which was just a general memorial service, there were no burials, because Jewish burials under Jewish law have to be done in a particular way and they have to be done quite quickly. He got booed and hissed and yelled at. And the thing that really matters in Australia is that as he was walking to his place to sit, he was having yelled at him, shame, 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 shame. Now, if that happens to you in Australia, it means you're really on the nose with a lot of the public.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
right.
he just completely failed. And he also changed. I mean, having met the man, he did genuinely. He was this happy, charming, friendly, one of the nicest people you could ever meet. You think, this guy is going to be the Prime Minister for 15 years or until he wants to get rid of the job, because he's just so lovely. And then, of course, that friendly, funny, lovely demeanour fell to pieces. And whenever he was spoken to or interviewed by the press, just an individual like yourself might be turning up to a press conference, he genuinely looked like someone had put a key in his back and was winding him up.
Right.
I'm not making this up.
No.
Try to imagine Boris Johnson speaking and sounding like Keir Starmer. That's what you have to imagine.
Yes, that's extraordinary. Let's just move on, because we're going to run out of time shortly. Not incredibly shortly, but let's have another 10 minutes. Let's talk about this idea of banning under 16s from social media. We keep hearing in this country that it's working very well in Australia. Is that true, first of all?
It's too early to tell. That would be my view. Now, the Australian system, I can give you a little bit of background on this, where this came from. Albanese read Jonathan Haidt's The Coddling of the American Mind, and he read Jean Twenge's book on the effect of social media on school children and mental health. And he was incredibly moved by it and influenced by it. So he has come to the view, and I think many people across the Labor Party and the coalition as well, which is why this legislation got through, have come to the view that social media is basically a net negative. You can't ban it, you can't take it away from adults, but you can at least take it away from children. And one thing Australia has done very successfully in many schools, I mean, there's a ban right across phones in schools and internet in schools. But what Australia has managed to do very, very effectively is stop kids from using the devices while they're in school.
Right.
You know, and they all have to go into yonder pouches, and they are only allowed to pick them up again when they leave the school gates, and so on and so forth. So what this legislation is a beefed up version of that. And it doesn't stop children from getting on the internet. They can still use the internet the way you and I may remember it from 20 or even 30 years ago.
As a source of information or whatever, right?
But what they can't do is generate an account. They can't have a Twitter X account. They can't have an Instagram account. They can't have a TikTok account.
Right.
They can't make their own content and broadcast it to the world, so they can't be monetized.
Okay.
So a lot of things that attract young people to the internet and to those social media platforms have been taken from them. Now, I will point out here that the evidence that Haidt and Twenge have assembled is very considerable. They're not making it up. It is also, however, very, very hard to do this, to do it well, because it is so difficult to regulate the internet. And I will say here, because I do believe that this is too early to tell, and I think people who are confidently saying that this legislation is working are really, really high on their own supply, because you will need to see figures over time, as Haidt provided over decades in the United States, about children, mental health issues, bullying issues, those kind of things. The legislation's only been in for about 4 months.
Right.
We don't know any of that yet. So people who are saying this are right out over their skis to say that they think, oh, yes, this is working.
Yes, because it's going to take many, probably years before you know what the end result will have been.
Absolutely.
And also how resourceful kids are going to be at getting around all of that.
Absolutely.
And whether they're going to be selling, cheap phones on the black market that they can buy, that they can somehow log into that nobody knows about, that they can actually access an account by pretending to be older than they are. There's all manner. I mean, kids are pretty resourceful in my experience. They can normally get around most laws. I mean, some people argue that, just because kids drink alcohol when they're 14 from time to time doesn't mean you shouldn't make it illegal. And you should still have the age of consent to be 16 and the age of drinking to be 18. You know what I mean? You don't need to make it a free-for-all. So I suppose on balance, whether or not it can be done is the first question. Whether or not having it there is going to at least discourage some people from getting involved.
Absolutely. This is very, very difficult to get right. It is genuinely hard to do this, to regulate the internet. I will just make this as a personal observation and not one that's been made by any Australian politician. In my view, in terms of internet regulation, because of the evidence base that Height and Tweng have assembled, this is the only regulation of the internet that's arguable, in my view. All the other stuff, all of the, you have to ban the AIs that could put Keir Starmer in a bikini and all of this kind of thing. I'm sorry, that's just very silly, and it's what I've come to call, with British politics especially, just displacement activity. Instead of something actually about the problems in the country, like the cost of living or the small boats or whatever. So it's actually, this is the one thing that you can argue for, and your resources as a state should be directed to working both with and against, where necessary, the social media companies to bring this about, because there is evidence that the internet for people under the age of 16 is very bad for them. Whereas there's far less evidence for all of the other claims that are made that, like, for example, pornography on the internet produces child sex offenders. That doesn't, just sex offenders generally, doesn't seem to be true. It's like the old arguments about if you play violent video games. There used to be Doom and Duke Nukem when I was young, but they're different ones now, Assassin's Creed and so on and so forth. That's going to turn you into a school shooter. Those claims have been falsified. So this is the one that is worth getting right. I hope it is possible to get right, but I think part of getting it right is giving up on all the silly stuff, all the flip-flam, all the, oh no, your AI can't put Keir Starmer in a bikini. I'm sorry, you're just not going to be able to do that. The world and his wife will just go, no, this is not going to happen. You can't run this.
Exactly. Also, I think we all quite like the idea of a rather stuck-up, pompous, hopeless, useless Prime Minister made fun of in whichever way we fancy doing it. Thanks very much indeed. We still live by and large in a free country. Listen, Helen, great to talk to you. Tell people where they can find your Substack before we do anything else.
My Substack is you will be familiar with my name on Twitter. My tagline on Twitter is "Not on your team, but always fair." So my Substack is www. all one word, not on your team, just run together. So the first half of that, .co.uk, www.notonyourteam.co.uk. That's where you'll find an article I've written about the collapse of the Adelaide Writers' Festival. That's the second most recent piece that's on the Substack that actually talks about the way the Australian people on both a Palestinian state and the government's relationship to the Jewish community and the trade union movement have just done a complete 180 degrees. The pro-Palestinian side thought they'd won and now they've lost. And I mean, it's crappy to be dragged into guilt by association because two bad Muslims did this thing, whereas other good Muslims, plus many of their friends, didn't do this thing. This happens to lots of people. Jews were blamed horribly, even if they hadn't engaged in cancellation campaigns trying to get people sacked, which alienated the unions. I have Jewish friends who are horrified by this behaviour, but they got blamed too. And that a considerable part of that is what led to the awfulness after Bondi, because people had won an argument and then in an hour on the beach, they lost it. And part of being a grown-up is accepting, okay, we lost it. And because people who are sympathetic to us behaved disgustingly, atrociously. And you just have to own that. It's the same problem that has existed in this country and is why reform is polling so well, is because people just perceive that the government's playing them for a sucker and behaved atrociously.
Yeah, absolutely right. Helen, great to talk to you again. We'll do it again soon, I'm sure. Good luck with it all, and we'll see you around.
Is this going live on Substack now?
This is live on Substack now. It's available, and then it's available to everyone on YouTube in 24 hours' time. So there's two. You get 2 bites of the cherry, basically. But what we'll do is we'll share your link and everything else with it as it's available on ours. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much for that,
Good
Mike.
to see you, Helen. Good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. See you soon. Keep up the good work. Keep the faith. That was another amazing after show, and of course we'll have more for you tomorrow, every single day after 9 o'clock, after the 2 hours that we do between 7 and 9 on the Mike Graham Show. Another Substack, another expert, another fascinating conversation, because that's what we do here. We like your thoughts on it. You can find us on Twitter at IROMG. Obviously on YouTube, it's the Mike Graham Show. If you want to join the Substack, because you'll be seeing this after the Substack's gone, it is the MikeGrahamShow.com. Facebook as well, we're going to be ramping that up too. So much more to do, so many news stories to cover, so much interesting stuff to discuss. And we want to hear from all of you, of course, as well. Don't forget, you can send us voice notes overnight if you wish, and we can play them out during the show. Do all that. We'll tell you how to do that on the Substack as well. And we'll see you tomorrow. Don't forget, no matter how many people there are out there, do not be a plank.
Remember, despite all of the others out there, it's always the others. Don't be a plank.